All right, here we are at the table saw. So at this point, we've already gone through the miter saw where we've cut the board to rough length. We've already gone to the planer to get that down to the desired thickness. We've already gone to the jointer to joint one side. Now we're at the table saw here to cut it to our desired width. So a few things we need to get prepared prior to our cut. We need to set up the machine for our specific cut. It's not just going to kind of happen on its own. So a few things we have to prepare prior to making our cut or our operation. We have to, on this is table saw 2. Behind us there we have table saw 1. Behind me there we have table saw 3. They're all set up for different uses. We're super fortunate to have each table saw set up for each purpose, to where you guys can walk on up, easily have that tool already kind of preset for you in some situations with having either a blade guard on it like here, or the riving knife or a dado. They're all kind of preset for you for your specific operation. So a few things I want to get prepared prior to making my cut here at table saw 2. With it off and motionless, I'm going to lift up the clear guard right here. I'm going to take my material, put it right alongside my blade. I'll put it on this side so you can see it. Then I'm going to raise the tooth up, the blade up. So it's about a 1/4 inch or like 1 carbide tooth, which is right like the actual cutting edge. I'm gonna raise that up so it's just high enough, and I'm doing so by cranking this hand wheel right on the front. So one right by your knee, right by the front of your body here. The one on the side of the saw, that one changes the angle of the saw. Sometimes you use that in Woods 2, Woods 3. We don't really use that as much in Woods 1. But I want that cranked up, and it's a rough measurement. You don't have to stress about it all that much. You don't want it overly high to potentially, have more opportunity for kickback or have more opportunity to get kind of caught up in that cutting operation. But then again, we don't want it right level with that surface, just in case your board has a little crook to it or like a bow where it comes up in the middle. What can happen then is you might be partway through your cut, and then it's cutting, and then it hits that riving knife or blade guard part. Then you're kind of stuck there. And I'll talk about that more in a minute, kind of what to do in that situation, but I want to prepare you guys to make your cutting operation. So first, again, you will set your blade height about 1 carbide tooth, 1/4 inch, right about there. Then we have to set our desired size. We do not take a tape measure and measure like so to set it there. We can trust the guide or gauge kind of here. So right here I have 0 all the way to 52 inches. A really key part of that though, between 0 to a foot or 12 inches, there are 32 little tiny lines. So that inch is broken up into 30 seconds. So if I were to go 1 and 4 little lines, instead of thinking like we do where we think about 16ths often, where 4 little lines would be 1 1/4, this would actually be 1 1/8. So that really matters. A lot of you guys that are making the wavy flag, your stripes are all 1 1/4 inches wide. It happens more often than I would like, where at the very beginning of the class where we're not as familiar with kind of the tool setup and things like that, you walk on up, you're assuming that it's in 16ths. We count 4 little lines and instantly they're all short. Then we need to remake those parts and go through all the prior processes we just already went through. All right, so take a look at that. You'll become much more familiar when you're at the tool and setting it up, day in, day out. But long story short, the gauge here is perfect. It's consistent. It's right on. If you have a certain measurement, whether it be 9 inches there or 10 inches there, that's going to be the exact measurement between the fence and the blade. That's going to be the exact measurement. So trust that. It's accurate. It's perfect. And you're all good to go there. The way I adjusted that, you just lift up this red handle. I like to have my right hand kind of on that, so that my left hand can go on the top of the fence there, or kind of bumping it to make small little adjustments. Try not to take your hand and go all the way down on the table. Sometimes if this table here, this black table to that cast iron table, if this isn't set like exactly right, there can be a sharp edge right here. Or what is absolutely always consistent, if you have your hand down here and you move that fence really close and your hand is sliding on in, your hand could fall into the miter gauge slots, and then this big old heavy fence will pinch you there. Hopefully that's only a mistake you'll make once. All right, so setting up the fence, right hand on here, left hand on the top, kind of moving that or making the small tap adjustments there, and you'll bring it right on in to your exact measurement. Of course, prior to making our cut, we can then put down the blade guard there. I'll talk about some other things kind of in the future that you can use. You don't always have to use them, but they're really nice additive kind of jigs or setups to make this process even easier. So at this point, I have my blade height all set. I have my fence all set up. I want to get my material in a comfy position. I want to get that where I have my jointed edge, which the whole reason we jointed that was so then we have a perfectly straight, square edge of the board that we can put up against the fence and it will track through. And the fence and the blade is perfectly parallel. So that's why we joint one side and then rip the other. A rip, you'll hear me talk about that quite often. A rip is when you're making a cut parallel to the grain. The grain structure, you can think about that tree as if the grain structure was going all the way up and down like the tubes that take nutrients to the top of the tree. That's that grain structure. So you can think about this board being a part of that tree that's going way up and down. If I cut along those, that grain direction, I'm essentially ripping the grain apart like so. If I'm cross cutting like that, I'm cutting across the grain. And we talked about that back at the miter saw a couple days ago, right? So I have my jointed edge. I'm referencing that up against the fence. And it's very important that you're keeping that board up against the fence and you're keeping it held down. If you look at the way the blade rotates, the blade is rotating. It's coming up and back as well. So you have to hold it down, right? That blade is spinning up and back. So then you have control of that. If it were spinning in the same direction that you were feeding, it would just take that material and toss it through, right? So that's the whole kind of the way that you have control amongst this kind of cutting operation, is the fact that that blade is somewhat fighting against you a little bit. So then you have that control to feed the material through at the rate that you want. All right, so again, we have the blade height all set. We have the fence all set with it off and motionless. I have this on down and I am standing to the left of the blade there. All right, I want to stand off to the left because we've talked about it a bit in class too with kickback. Kickback happens when the board is lodged or jammed up between the blade and the fence, or the blade and something else, which we'll talk about in a minute. And again, the rotation of that blade is spinning on backwards towards us. So if something's lodged and that blade is going to launch it, it's going to launch it back in this direction. So I want you to be standing and myself standing off to the left. So then if something were to happen, right? If something were to happen, stuff's going to get launched kind of beyond you there. You don't want to get wrapped up and be a part of that kind of launching of that board at all. That's kickback. And sadly, it kind of happens. You need to do everything you can to properly set up the tool, properly set up your material, and using extra jigs or fixtures like our hold downs here, which hold the material down, or the feather boards here, which keep the board right up against the fence and track and straight. Whenever you can use these, I would absolutely like to utilize those systems there. The way you utilize the feather board is first you will get your fence all set up. Let's see what this board measures. Right now I'm right on 5 inches. Let's just cut it at 4, just for this example. So I'm going to move it on over to 4. Get that all set up. I'm gonna lock that down, and that fence is nice and sturdy now, all right? I'm going to lift the blade guard up. Again, I can hear that it's off. I can see through the guard that it's off. Then also right here on the front, right here, there's a solid green light. When that light is a solid green, it means everything is off and motionless. If you ever see that green light blinking, that means that that blade is slowing down as well, which will be important here in a minute. But you'll take your material, you'll reference it right up against the fence. You'll, with it, obviously again with it off, you'll just push it all the way up. And then your featherboard, essentially it's like another set of hands. It's even better than that because I can leave it right up here and it's going to keep some pressure in there. All these fins kind of fold over and we can move it on up. And there's some magnets here. When we turn those on and put it on there, it's super strong, all right? It's super strong. It'll be super handy to keep that board up against the fence and keep everything tracking right on through. And it also is very, very, very important in where we place this. If we place it way too far back, we have no room to comfortably hold down and kind of in with our hand too. And then on the other side of that coin, if we have it way far up here in line with the blade there, what's going to happen is you're going to pinch your off cut. An off cut is when you cut on through this. Let's act like I'm cutting. If you cut on through this, of course, this part here is being cut, right? Let's act like this is being kind of cut there. This part over here is then going to be unsupported. I'm pushing through the part between the fence and the blade with my push stick or my hand if that board's super wide. And I'm keeping that forward momentum going on through there, but I'm not moving this left off-cut piece at all. What would happen if you had the feather board beyond the blade itself is it's going to pinch this way and pinch this way between the feather board and the blade. And at that point, nothing is moving that board continually through that process. It's going to pause once that board gets severed completely in half. This offcut is going to stop moving there. But it's still in contact with the feather board, which is pushing it this way, which is then going to push it into the blade. Again, the blade spins backwards. And unfortunately, then it could launch that board back through here. And oftentimes, your off cut is a smaller piece, right? Where you have the piece that you wanted, the piece that you cut off. And sometimes those little pieces can be kind of pointy and sharp. And honestly, that being launched back at a very quick rate, I would definitely want to avoid even blunt objects like that, but especially sharp objects like that. And it's coming right in this kind of area here. If you were to be standing kind of in line, you would definitely not want to be kind of in that line of fire. So we're going to stay off to the left, and that kind of puts you in a good position too with your right hand, with your push stick, to be driving that board on through. And you have a good area here, a good safe area here to put your offhand once that board is all the way on the table where you can push it on through. All right, so I don't mean to scare you by using the feather boards. There's absolutely good and kind of bad that comes of it. There's far more good with keeping that board up against the fence and keeping it tracking right on through. But it is very important to know kind of where to set that up. A good rule of thumb, an area that I ask you to locate this on this front part of the feather board, I ask for you to line that up with the red throat plate here, that red part there. So I want you to draw an imaginary line in your mind coming straight out and put that feather board in line with that. Try not to exceed kind of past that. You don't need to go way before that. I like for you guys to be right about in line with that. And then you have a little bit of real estate here where when you are pushing your board through, you can then still have your hand right here. Your thumb is holding that board down and your pointer finger, kind of the side of it right there, you're holding that board up against the fence like so. Obviously this is here, but it's still a really good practice for you to be in a habit of using kind of your hand to keep that board down and up against the fence, just so when this isn't being used, you still have those good habits, those good practices and kind of things like that. All right, so with that feather board being right even with that red throat plate area there, it gives you enough room here to where you can keep your hand there. And your left hand is going to stay in that position until that board gets fully on the table there. All right, so I'm gonna keep it there, keep it there, keep it there, keep it there, keep it there. Once it gets on the table, I'm gonna keep my left hand on the board, but I'm gonna take my right hand, reach on over to grab my push stick. I like to have my push stick either leaned up there or in this general area, an area where I can easily reach it mid-cut. I don't want that, way over here where I have to reach on over. I don't want it outside of arm's reach where I have to kind of lean over really far. I want to kind of seamlessly have that here, so when I need it, I can just quickly reference it and use that rolling on through. You will of course have this blade guard down. I'm having it up right now so you can really see kind of what's happening below that cut, but you will of course have that down before you turn the machine on, right? When you do grab that push stick, I can't stress this enough, keep that left hand on the board. Keep that left hand on the board. When you grab that push stick, you're gonna wanna put it roughly in the middle of your board, right? You don't have to stress about it as much, but make it a rough attempt to put it partway in the middle of the board, and then put that on a slight angle to where when you're driving that board through, you're pushing that up against the fence and you're keeping it parallel and running right up against the fence. That's the biggest thing on the table saw, is to be in direct contact with the straight jointed side of that board and the rip fence there. All right, so again, left hand like here, like so, pushing right on through, right on through, right on through. When it gets all the way on, you'll have it, over there. Grab that and push it all the way through until that board, that end point there, is past the other red side of that feather, of that throat plate. Because if you leave that just partway through, again, kickback happens when that board is jammed or lodged between two areas. If I were to leave that board just partway through and then take my hands off, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but I'm saying that it could happen, where with that board being jammed up between the blade and the fence, that you have that chance of that kickback motion there. And obviously we want to avoid that as much as we can. When you are making your cuts, I would, if I were you, I would try to get organized kind of prior to my cut. I've already gone through all the steps prior. I've already cut it to rough length. I've already planed it. I've already jointed an edge. I'm in a good position here. If you have a big old stack of boards here, try to do some prep work to where when you're actually cutting, you're just kind of rolling on through, making your cuts, and focusing at that time on keeping the board down, keeping the board up against the fence, feeding all the way through. Try to give yourself, when you're actually doing that cutting operation, fewer things to focus and need to draw your attention to. So some things I can do prior to my cut. I can obviously have my push stick nice and close. All of my boards that are all stacked up, I can have them nice and neat with the jointed side, all facing the same direction and placed right here. So when I'm making a cut, they're all in the same direction. So I can just grab it and already have that jointed side where I need it to. I can make that cut, have my next one, kind of, just push that one through, and you're off to the races. When you have many boards that you're cutting, if somebody is available, if one of your buddies are available, grab them. They can catch the board for you. When they're catching the board, they're standing on the out feed side of it. You're on the in feed side. You're feeding the board in and through and then out. When they're catching it, really the only thing they're doing is kind of moving, can you pan over here please? It's like moving that board left or right, so when you have area to move the next board. You don't want to be pushing through board after board after board and then sending those boards off the end of the cliff there, all right? So if you have somebody to catch, they'll be moving those boards left and right to where you can, move the boards on through and they have a spot to land, but you don't need somebody to be there, right? You can make as many cuts as you need to, and then as soon as that board is kind of reaching the end point there, shut it off right here, wait for it to stop, walk on around, move those boards there, and then you can continue making your follow-in cuts. You don't want to be launching those boards off the end. When they fall off the end, they're landing on each other, they're denting, they're being damaged, they're chipping out, things like that, right? We want to keep our boards nice and clean and as dent-free as possible. All right, so again, recap, things I have all set up. I have my blade height, I have my fence all set, I have my feather board all set. One other system that is very handy that I would like for you to utilize when possible are these hold downs here. I'll put this out of the way too. So the hold downs, similar to the feather board, how this is kind of like an extra set of hands, these hold downs here are kind of the same thing, all right? They're gonna hold the board down, right? The feather board, that held the board in, but these hold downs are gonna hold the board down, and they're super handy. We're extremely fortunate to have these things here. And the way you set this up, could you zoom in pretty close, kind of in here, appreciate it. The way you set this all up, you'll loosen up this top black knob, you'll loosen that on up, and then you will lift it up, over, and down. And then you'll set this lower kind of black area here right down on the workpiece that you're machining, right? It will kind of take that thickness, you'll push down on that, then you'll tighten up this part here. Then when you go to push your board in up against the fence and you push it in, you'll see this kind of spring up a little bit, then it'll be under tension. And the really cool thing about these wheels, the wheels here, they only spin the one direction. So the board easily goes that way, but they don't rotate backwards. So it's very difficult for that board to come kind of backwards. I need to really reef on it a lot, and that's obviously good to keep that board tracking straight and that way that we want it to, right? If you have it all set up and you want to get your board out prior to your cut, you can gently move that up a little bit. There's some spring action in there. If you happen to move it up and it stays way up there, you'll need to recalibrate it with loosening this back up, moving it back down, snugging it up, but maybe tighten this a touch more than you did prior if that moved last time. You can pop it up a little bit, get it out of the way. Then you'll need to set your fence all up to your desired size. Then you'll need to set your feather board up and you're all good to go. There's one here. There's most likely, we usually have two on there as well, and we have one there as well. I say we can use this sometimes because sometimes we can't. When we have that blade guard and that height gauge all down, we have these out and we're making a cut, say less than 4 inches or so. There's not quite going to be enough room for you to use your push stick and to get that through there. There's not quite enough real estate to kind of weasel that through there and all the things. So if you're kind of in that little strange midpoint where the board's bigger than 2 inches to where you're using table saw 2, and then smaller than 4 inches, you're not going to be able to use the hold downs. But if it's greater than 4 inches or so, I really like you to utilize this. It really does not take long at all to set these guys up. I use them all the time on my personal projects, and they're so nice to keep your board down, up against the fence, tracking right on through, and it's just an extra set of hands that keep you all in place, all right? When you're done with the hold downs, I ask that you loosen this up, pop it up here, put it back away, and then snug this back up, tighten it back up by hand. In case it's loose, I don't want all the vibration of the tool when it's on, day in, day out, to be loosening this up and losing components. I don't want components to be loose and then fall out and then gets swept up at the end of the hour when we're all cleaning up and kind of things like that. So when you're done with it, put it back up there, or if you can't use it, make sure it's up there so then when you're pushing your push stick on through, you can flow through there nice and easy. When you're done with the Featherboard 2, I'll have you, when it's engaged, right, both of these will be on. It'll be, rock solid. You'll turn them both off, and then you will pick it on up in the air. I like to turn one of them back on. Then you can put it right here on the front. It'll stay there, so it's nice and neat, and it's kind of there when needed. All right. So I've referenced the table saw we're working on right now for this demo here. This is table saw 2. All right. Behind us there we have table saw 1. Behind me there we have table saw 3. They're all set up for different uses. Table saw 2, the main thing you will want to kind of, remember and get locked in on is we use table saw 2 when we have rips. Again, a rip is when you're cutting along the grain with a cut wider than 2 inches. If it's skinnier than 2 inches, again, we won't have enough room to get that push stick on through there without adjusting the blade guard and all these things. And you will have many pieces on your project that your cut is skinnier than 2 inches, and we'll get to that later on table saw 3. But we try to use this table saw here as much as we can, just because it has that added blade guard feature there. It has the hold downs here that I really like to utilize. One other really cool feature, when you're pushing your board on through and you're tracking on through, there's these really cool little kickback fingers there. So when your board goes all the way through, and these kickback fingers have springs in them to where they go through this way really easy, but those hooks kind of dig on in nice where it doesn't move back super easy. Those hooks kind of dig into the lumber, and it keeps it from coming back very easily. So anytime we can use a guard like this where it's covering up that area, hold downs like this, kickback fingers like that, kind of the better. Again, there are some situations, whether it be your board's too skinny or some other factors like that, where we can't quite utilize that. And we do have other table saws set up for that. But when able, I really like to utilize kind of this kind of setup here. So again, quickly reviewing this to get it all set up. I have my blade guard my blade height all set. I have my fence all set. And then I'm ready to rock and roll. I got my push stick over here. I'm all dialed in. I have my hold downs in the future. I have my featherboard all dialed in. I'm going to stand off to the left of the blade. I'm going to turn it on right here. And then I will again move that on through like so. Once that board gets all the way on the table, I'm going to use that right hand, keeping my left hand on there, and I'm going to push that all the way through. Then at this point, once that blade's all the way past that red throat plate there, you can turn the machine off, which is right here, either with your left hand, which will be free because you'll be over here. You can turn that off with your left hand, or with one of your knees. You can kind of reference that as well, and you can shut that off there. One more thing I want to mention. Sometimes you're in no man's land when that board is really pinched on the blade guard. The whole point of this blade guard or riving knife kind of part here is to keep that board tracking straight to where if you're part way in, it can't rotate over, which again, that's how kickback kind of gets started. It will keep that in line. One thing also, lumber is a very strange deal. Wood's kind of strange. There's a lot of tension or kind of pressure in the lumber. I could be cutting and removing this area of material here, but lumber could be pinching back there and back there as well. And I could have a gap here in one moment, and then if it pinches on there and it pinches this side of this, if we don't have this hunk of metal here where it's going to keep that area wedged open, if we don't have that here, that board is going to then pinch on the blade. And again, that blade is spinning back in that direction. If it pinches on that blade, it has the potential to lift up and stuff like that. All right, so that's also one of the reasons we have that riving knife there. All right, There was one more thing that I wanted to kind of mention prior. I didn't say that prior. All right. So yeah, we're all good. I have my blade height set, I have my fence all set. I have all of those good things all dialed in. Again, when you're pushing on through, keep that left hand nice and steady. Push that on through there. Go all the way through. Shut it off. All the good things. The obvious, just regular housekeeping, just safe practices. This is a tool where you're kind of leaning over it a decent bit, pushing on through. If you have, bracelets or hoodie strings or necklaces or, baggy sleeves or floppy flannels, kind of things like that, you want to make sure all those things are kind of taken care of. You don't want to give that tool any opportunity to kind of bring you in to that cut there. All right, this is table saw 2. Again, we'll use this table saw for rips wider than 2 inches. All right, thank you.